Welcome to the Woven Energy podcast on Real Practical Shamanism. I'm here with Damon Smith. My name's Joseph Sikora, and we are here to talk about shamanism from the ground up. Now, this is going to be one of those episodes we are putting together a Q&A. So you've been sending in a few emails and asking questions. So we thought we'd dedicate an episode to answering some of those for you. Hopefully we'll get through as many as we can. We'll probably spend about half an hour, 40 minutes, something like that. So, Damon, are you with us?
I am indeed, Joe. Hi.
Hello. How are you feeling today?
Yeah, I'm actually good. I believe you're a bit tired than me this time around.
for once. Yeah. So, should we launch into these then?
Sure.
Okay, so the first question is from someone called Lisselle, and if I'm pronouncing that right. And I've boiled it down to... as someone who's struggled with delusions and perhaps a breakdown in the past, he's doubting his intuition. So how can he make sure that he's not being delusional again?
It's a good question. I mean, it's that question is really the foundation of becoming a shaman. You know, the first stages in becoming a shaman. We talked a lot about becoming like a capacious container. And how can you be sure that you're not being delusional? Well, it in a way, that's more a matter of degree, you know. Chalisti, Bhaktamshasab, if you want to call it that, is something that you have to constantly work on, especially if you live in the kind of society that we live in. We are programmed with delusion. Heavy layers upon layers upon layers of delusion by our culture, and to the point where we could never possibly extract ourselves from it. So one thing I would say is, first of all, don't beat yourself up over it. It's the expectation that you can somehow instantly become free of delusion is rather a delusional expectation. And you know, the idea is that the general foundational idea is that if you are not thinking, then you're less likely to be delusional. If you have no expectation as to what will arise when you start practicing your shamanic technique, then you will have a lot better sense or feeling for whether what is arising is ultimately coming from outside of you, i.e. coming from nature, from the world, from the environment, and is therefore not delusional, or is being generated by the huge baggage that is present in every one of us, and which we've called the miasma. And which we've said in shamanistic society, there are no end of words for the miasma. But let's go with Tiran. Yeah. And so just try your best not to think when you're practicing shamanic technique. Also, when you're practicing shamanic technique, definitely set aside the time to when you practice shamanic technique, no matter which of the various types of technique that we've described on the podcast, or other types that we haven't yet described, it's good to set that aside. You don't want to be doing something else at the time. I mean, when you get more experienced with it, you can be. You can start practicing your shamanic technique all times of the day, when you stand at the bus stop, all that kind of stuff. But to start off with, it's much better to set some time aside. You don't want to be in a kind of half shamanic mode, at least not to begin with. And first of all, try to practice Chalisti, which we've given a lot of information about how to go about doing that, and there are various aspects to it. And we've said that, with these three aspects, we talked about Bat, Tosheltien, and Guchach. Those three aspects can be focused on or practiced individually, and then all practiced together once you get a good sense for each one of them. The key is to being confident that the experiences that you have when you practice your shamanic technique are not delusional. The key is not to generate them yourself. And so one of the things I would steer you away from, or try to encourage you to steer away from, is the type of supposedly shamanistic technique where you're asked to imagine things. If you use as part of your shamanic technique some sort of thing where you start imagining things. I think Joe sometimes describes it as imagine falling down a hole or something like that. But there are lots of things you could potentially be asked to imagine, almost anything, you can imagine almost anything. Then that is a dreadful starting point. I'm not saying that, some techniques based like that for very advanced shamanism, higher levels of technique have no value at all. But, I'm going to have a meeting with my spirit animal, and I imagine that I'm, all that kind of thing. To start off with, just please don't do that.
Yeah. Well, it sounds like he's coming. Sorry, carry on.
I was just going to say, think about emptying yourself. If you're completely empty and you're not imagining and you're not thinking and you're not expecting and you're not judging, and you can get yourself into that place, then by default, you'll end up in a place. Without doing anything else, you'll end up in a place where you can have confidence that what you're experiencing is not your imagination and is actually coming from outside of you.
I was about to say as well, he sounds like he's coming from a place where he has had trouble with delusions in the past, maybe some sort of issue with that.
So just maybe, he's a step further than most people.
That's what I was about to say, yeah. Maybe,
yes, absolutely.
Maybe. Because he started to question that and understands what that is, maybe he's starting at a better place.
Yes, it's not the greatest place, but maybe it's a way better place than somebody who's got delusions and doesn't recognize it, and everybody. It's a way better place. And another thing I would say, one of my most advanced students, one of the people who, if you want to call him a student, one of the people who's got the furthest, Joe's met this person. I'm not going to mention him by name, but he started in a place where he was very much in that place. He had big problems with visions, and imagination and experiences, early on in his shamanism. And I think that was a big barrier for him, but also the fact that he was naturally in that kind of place to start off with, and he recognized it. Actually, in the end, he became a very, very able shaman. I don't know if Joe can guess who I'm talking about, but he became a very, very able shaman and able to do some quite impressive things that even, that I would say he has performed shamanic feats that I couldn't do. Despite the fact that it was me that kind of helped him with his shamanism. And he was in that very place when he started. So I wouldn't despair over that. It's a good starting point. And you may have heard of a thing called the shaman sickness, which is effectively that a shaman, in traditional shamanic societies, some traditional shamanic societies, the shamans start off with a kind of illness. It's a kind of what we would describe it as a mental illness. And through their discipline, through their practice, they manage to effectively cure themselves of that illness. And that illness is all around this kind of natural propensity towards heavyweight delusions, almost things that the person themselves has no actual physical control over. I guess we would call it psychosis or something like that. And through their disciplined training over many years, they managed to cure themselves of that. And, I don't know whether this is true or not, but the tradition has it that those types of people who go through that experience are the ones who go on to become the really great shamans. So, I wouldn't complain about starting in that place. I think it's a good place to start. Yeah.
Fantastic. Okay. Question 2. This is from Mike. Okay. So where and, so there's a bit of preamble as well, but where and how has Damon trained in shamanism, and what kind of academic experience with it does he have? Because I think he's asking because you've mentioned it on the podcast.
Yeah. So where and how have I trained in shamanism? In many, many, many places. So I think that the difficulty with answering this question is the kind of stereotypical idea that many people in our society have of what shamanism is. I have never gone up a mountain in Nepal and met a guru with a long white beard and sat in his hut studying shamanism under him for, decades. I've never done that. I think we've described several times how I got into shamanism. I got into shamanism because I studied martial arts and I started working on a particular martial art that, in my opinion, is extremely shamanistic. And I started working on that stuff in Scotland in the 1980s. And I had several teachers. Obviously, I had several teachers for that particular martial art. It's called Xingyi. And I had other teachers. So several times I've mentioned the Shinshu-kyo, which again, when I translate that into the Japanese new religions, again, all the preconceptions, all the miasma starts to bear on the words that I'm using. And so people may not hear what I'm saying. But the Japanese new religions, the Shinshu-kyo, were a group of traditions that were not religions. Just that's what Shin means new, Shu means a kind of group or a kind of spirituality, and Kyo means teaching. So Shinshu-kyo in Japanese, the word, new religion, the word new's in there, but the word religion isn't. So I'm trying to give you a sense that the miasma has a heavy bearing on what these things are when they come to the West. Now, the bulk of my training, my learning in this stuff has come via that particular avenue. I met my teacher. I had two main teachers, one still. And I studied a bit of that stuff with a different Japanese teacher in the 1980s. But in the 1990s, the early 1990s, I met my main teacher, who I've mentioned before. And he is still my teacher today. So I have studied with him from 1992 until 2018. And he's still my teacher. And I'm hoping to visit him in about a month's time. So that's where a lot of that stuff comes from. But in terms of the particular martial art that I studied back then that got me into shamanism, in my opinion, that martial art, and this would be very controversial in martial arts circles because most people who learned that martial art in the West certainly don't see it that way, and there's various historical reasons for it. But in my opinion, that particular martial art is extremely shamanistic, more shamanistic than many of the shamanistic traditions that you might learn if you did end up a hill with a guy with a beard. In the middle 90s, I studied in the Department of East Asian Studies at Leeds University, and I specialised in Mongolian studies. At that point in time, and that was a postgraduate work, and so when I refer to my academic experience, that's what I'm referring to. Mongolia being traditionally a shamanistic society. And so my postgraduate work at Leeds University in the mid-ish 90s, that's what I refer to when I'm talking about my academic work on that. But then, there's a lot of people. I have a close friend from South America who I was fortunate enough to spend a lot of time working with over the period of a year. And I learned an awful lot from that person. That would be about 5 years ago now. But the effectively 4 different teachers that I had for Xingyi, I learned a lot of those people. Also,
and you continue to learn, and you're getting teachers all the time.
And I'm not, and as Joe knows, I'm not finished. I can keep going on giving you more and more things where I learn stuff from. Who helped me to go really deep with this stuff? The single person who helped me go deep with this stuff is the guy who I refer to as my teacher, my main teacher. And he's from Japanese Shinshu-kyo tradition. Yeah.
Okay, I think that's a fantastic answer. Let's move on. So I've got a question here which is very similar to the first question from Ben, but I think it comes in two parts and we can maybe explore another part. So he's saying he's concerned when he finally gets to the point where he can achieve chillicity, he's worried his bias and jadedness will leak in through tainting anything he does, thus defeating the point of healing. I want to make sure I start my practice ethically if I'm going to do this, which I think is a very similar point to the first question, if you agree.
Sure. Ethics.
To be honest, I think he might be not a native English speaker, so I'm not sure.
Yeah, sure. So just repeat it again, because, I mean, my knee-jerk reaction there was to say that ethics are part of the miasma. So you want to not be thinking about ethics when you start your shamanistic practice, but maybe this is a translation issue. So just repeat it back again, Joe.
So, So he's mostly concerned when he finally gets to a point where he can achieve chillicity, he's worried his bias and jadedness will leak through tainting anything he does, thus defeating the point of healing. And he uses the word healing. I want to make sure I start my practice ethically if I'm going to do this.
So I think what he's possibly worried about is something that I would worry about as well, which is the idea of chillicity as something that turns you into a kind of automaton. In the Japanese tradition, there's this concept of Moonen Musel, which in Chinese would be Wu. In that conception of the world, there's different ways of looking at it. It can be taken as chillicity, but on another level, it's been misused as unthinkingness, unquestioningness. And that unquestioningness, that's the thing that protects you from that is Toshalteen. Yeah. So because Toshalteen is like the exact opposite of unquestioningness. And so, yes, so that idea that has been used in various generations, for instance, in Japan of Moonen Musel, which is like, bat and a bit of guchach without any Toshalteen at all, being used as a sort of excuse to point a bunch of soldiers at some defenseless civilians and tell them to slaughter them, and because they're unthinking, they just go and do it. That has got nothing to do with shamanism. And now, so I guess one of the questions is, if you enter a state of chillicity, do you become, is it like hypnotism? Do you become manipulable? Are people able to use the miasma as leverage to get you to do things you don't want to do against your will? Or alternatively, is there some kind of ingrained unpleasantness inside you that's going to come out when you clear the vessel? I think that is definitely possible if in your chillicity training you only focus on bat. And a lot of chillicity training in traditions like Zen, maybe it's a bit unfair to Zen, has been focused on bat and perhaps guchach. But in military training, in some societies where, a spiritual basis has been provided for the military training, you think of ancient Sparta, this over-focus on bat can definitely put you in a place where that is likely to happen. So here's my tip on that one. Very, very simple. If that's something that worries you, if you think there is something, fairly insidious inside you just waiting for the opportunity to come out, then hey, focus on Toshalteen as much as you can. And that will definitely prevent that from happening, because in a way Toshalteen is the exact opposite of that.
To be fair to Ben as well, I am trying to condense down quite a long email here, so maybe I haven't got his point across. Yeah. But one thing I want to do for Ben is just question something he said, which I think will give him some useful advice. He's saying he used to be an analyst, and so has a pretty rigid logical streak in him. Yeah. And so I'm wondering if you have any advice for particularly logical people who have a problem with that.
Yes,
to achieve
I know
chillicity.
Exactly what he means, because I do work with a lot of in my day-to-day job, I work with a lot of different teams, and actually some analysts on some of the teams that I work with. And I know exactly what it means. And it is a bit of a difficulty. It's because analysts, by the nature of their very job, they have to be dissective. They have to break things down into little parts. And what I would say was that, just two things. One is keep sight of the fact that the whole can be greater than the sum of the parts. And what is the holistic aspect in anything that you're doing? Once again, for exactly the same reason, I would strongly recommend for people who are this way naturally inclined, somebody who's naturally leans to that type of a role or that type of a job and has that kind of natural dissective inclination within them, Toshalteen is your defense against that.
Which is episode 8, second component of Chillicity. Lots of detail on that. By the way, and we should mention again, Chillicity, which is the foundation. We cover that throughout the whole podcast, but in particular in episodes 7, 8, and 9.
Yes. So if you remember how we talked about crossing a river, and I was asked to find a way across the river, and that's a dissective thing, isn't it? Oh, first I'll stand on this rock, and then maybe I'll stand on that rock, and maybe they're more efficient to
what's
go
the What's the more efficient and logical way I can get from A to B?
Rather than how can I be in that place of river crossingness?
Yeah. Fantastic. Okay, so this next question is from eFlash, and I'm going to slightly rephrase the question rather than go into any dangerous territory with this, and simply ask you that there are certain groups out there which talk about core shamanism. Could you explain what core shamanism is from the woven energy point of view?
Sure, that's very easy. So
we don't get it mixed up.
I don't know what the correct word is, but effectively the paraphernalia of shamanism, the phenomenology of shamanism, the things that shamanism does that are part of different cultures and different places where people live and different traditions, the religious ethics of shamanistic traditions, the underlying assumptions and judgments that people practicing shamanism make when they are discussing shamanism, learning shamanism, practicing shamanism, the techniques that are built upon underlying assumptions that are part of a shamanistic culture. Get rid of all of that stuff, and what's left to you is core shamanism. That's my understanding of it.
Yeah. Would you say another aspect of it would be hunter-gatherer shamanism, maybe a more accurate term? I don't know.
Yeah, I think in terms of core shamanism, what I would call core shamanism, hunter-gatherer shamanism would in general be closer to that than, for instance, pastoral shamanism. But you've got to remember, hunter-gatherer shamanism in the modern age, if you're unfortunate enough to be in one of those societies, being bullied and pushed around and stamped upon and abused by dominator culture, in the modern age, your shamanism is going to get pretty badly warped, just not as badly as everybody else's. So, I still, even hunter-gatherer shamanism in the modern world, what's core shamanism? Core shamanism is pure shamanism. It's just shamanism. It's shamanism with all of the nonsense just stripped away. So getting to core shamanism is like, peeling an onion or something, getting rid of all those layers and getting into the heart of it. And it's about a change of focus. It's about a change of focus from what's not important, which is all the things that you think are important when you start studying shamanism, to what is important, which is getting rid of all of the things you think are important when you start studying shamanism. Yeah.
Perfect. All right, then. This next question is from Simon, and so Simon says, in episode 8, Damon described some spirit dance moves, but I found it hard to visualize and wondered if there is any videos out there of people doing it, or images that could enhance the description.
Yes, the simple answer is yes. I have done some preliminary recording of video for I think we mentioned it before. The working title, The Grove. Yeah. Which is like a members area that people could log into and watch videos, because we kind of recognize a lot of this stuff makes video. That's not coming on at the pace that I would like, simply because of my lack of time. I'm involved in a pretty heavy duty project activity at the moment with my work, and it's not giving me very much time, and there's a lot of setup on that, and I'm not entirely sure that I'm happy with the quality of the videos that I have shot already. I think, Joe, you've seen maybe one or two of these videos. Yeah. So I'd like to reshoot them. I said I would put that off until the summer came and there was a nice weather, so we could get some really nice lighting. I'm kind of blessed, as you know, to live in an area where there are some stunning shamanic backdrop, shall we say. I mean, I live walking distance from one of the best stone circles in the UK. So if I get out there, I've recently invested in a better camera and a microphone, because Joe was complaining about the sound quality of everything that I do. And this is very recent. I mean, this is literally last week. So yes, all I can say is watch this space, but it's coming. I just don't know when.
Perfect. Second question from Simon. I have created my own sacred space in the local woods where I can go to for practicing shamanic exercises and techniques. Damon mentions marking out such a place, such a space, but I wondered if there are any instructions to start me off.
Mate, the fact that you've done this is brilliant. That is starting off. That's well and truly started off. Mm-hmm. When I demarcate the space, it's kind of the space tells me how to do that. So there's a kind of torsional teen exercise for you. Is let the space tell you how to do that. You get in a state of chillicity, just start moving stuff around, stay in the state of chillicity, and see what happens. But effectively, you want to concentrate your activities around the boundary of the space, obviously. And not every space is the same. It's a bit, I guess you could call it something like feng shui, something like that, where you are creating a nice harmonious sort of area. I mean, you can do the sort of twisted white ropes that they use in Japan, or maybe hang ribbons from trees or whatever you want, really. To me, the much more important thing, the thing that I was delighted in the question is the fact that the guy's done that. That's 90% of the brilliance of that question. The other 10%, just let the space teach you. Again, in the Grove, I'll probably show some ones that I've done, some spaces that I've done. Have a look at, we've mentioned land art before. Have a look at some of the land art images that are online, and look at if you just put land art into Google Images, you'll see an awful lot of stuff. And then the ones to pull out for your attention are the ones where it shows stuff that could almost just about have happened naturally. You can tell that there's something human generated in there, but it's almost verging on that could have happened just through the normal processes of nature. And it probably did in some of those cases. If the artist is in a very, very kind of shamanistic state when they're doing it, it probably was nature that drove them to do that, to create a balance in the environment, to create a sacred space, if you like. But if you're asking how I do it, no two are the same. And this is part of my torsional teen practice. Yeah.
Brilliant.
And like I say, in the Grove, I'll give some video. I'll probably show me doing that. Yeah.
Brilliant. Okay. Bryn asks, I was fascinated on the interpretation of the I Ching. which I believe were the last few episodes we've done, weren't they? But must admit to finding Damon's examples a bit hard to follow. In particular, the one about lighting a fire. Would there be a chance of an in-depth baseline explanation of just one example in a future podcast?
Let's just say yes. We will do. We'll mark it with health warnings. Like he got in a pack of cigarettes. The I Ching. It's one of these again. I know that you were talking about double-edged sword a little while ago. Yeah. It's very much the same kind of thing. Yeah, let's do that and put a health warning on it. Joe will remind me, but now I've committed to it. It'll happen. Yeah.
Okay. So. Well, we might get through a few, but I think there's a lot of quality culture. Without dismissing it. I think there's a lot of quality in exploring it, with the caveat, and like you're saying, you've got to understand that it is a baseline explanation, and you need to get beyond that.
But there's a lot of Chinese culture to talk about in that particular example. There's a lot of Chinese culture, so it may be more than one baseline episode.
Because to really
grasp that, you really have to understand Chinese culture, and that's not the Chinese culture of today either. Yeah. That's a Chinese culture of, it's probably pre-Qing dynasty culture, and not the culture of the whole of China either. But there are things, we said before, I mentioned, the things, the assumptions that your shamanic practice are based upon.
Yeah.
Chinese culture has more of those things than any other culture in the world, simply because, if for no other reason, they've had longer to work on them than developing them. And there are layers and layers and layers and layers of that stuff.
Mm.
But, in all early languages, all languages that have shamanism as their as part of their upbringing, there's always this kind of complexity, because mechanistic languages like English, they are very focused on this whole idea of putting things in little boxes, and the whole conceptual framework is, I talked about the stone circles that are like just near my house. There's actually more than one of them. They're amazing. They're amazing places, but there's a car park near them, and I just see people that tourists. They drive into that car park. They walk up the stone circle, and that's it. Done the stone circle, tick box. next thing, next little box, and oh my goodness, Yeah. And in the Cornish language, the stone circles are sometimes described with this term duncia. And why would people use that word? Means dance. Yeah. Why would people call a stone circle or use the word duncia to talk about a stone circle, And, the answer is, I don't know how much people know about Cornish, but it's a language that's been revived after having a couple of 100 years of a pretty bad time at the expense of English. Cornish was kind of suppressed by English. And just the fact that it's stone, yeah. So there's a box, it's stone, tick in the stone box, and it's a circle, tick in the shape box, if you like. We've got one in the material box and one in the, there's an English description of it. And then duncia, dancing stones, that's not really putting them in a box. That's what they are, right? Do you follow what I'm saying? So it's kind of like, there's a lot of stuff you need to understand with how Chinese, which is very much a idiomatic language, it's a language of feeling, of sense, of flavors, migrated in modern times into a kind of put things in little boxes kind of language. And in that process, a lot of words got redefined. Even the word for martial arts, wushu, got redefined, what that actually means, and one of the reasons I'm a bit down on martial arts these days, I'm not a big fan of martial arts, and people find that strange given that I've seemed to have dedicated my whole life to it. is that what the term martial arts means to most people in our society, I'm not interested in that. I have no interest whatsoever in that. Do you follow what I'm saying?
Yeah.
So it's like, so this is where I come to this point of, which I think has frustrated a few of my students, some of whom Joe knows, my martial arts students. I mean, that the Damon's lack of interest in these martial arts that he teaches all the time, annoys some people. And it's not really that I don't like doing that. Just to me, it isn't martial arts. It's, it's a spirit dance, so.
Okay, perfect.
Yeah.
This is another question from Bryn, which came a few months ago, and I'm going to apologise to you, Bryn, right now, because I'm not going to read out most of this question because it's comparing to perhaps others in this field, which we don't want to do. But there is something I can ask in here, and that is, I think he's just curious. Is there anyone, in your opinion, that you know who's teaching on the subject of shamanism that's more in line with you and what you would talk about on the podcast?
I think that more in line with me, that's a judgment call, isn't it? I admire Terence McKenna. That's probably come through in previous podcasts. So if you ask whose works have made me feel richer, the answer to that would be Terence McKenna, probably by a considerable distance. Does that mean that I would probably agree with him? I mean, he's no longer with us, but does that mean I would agree with him if I was ever fortunate enough to meet the guy? Probably not on every subject, but this need for agreement, that's all part of the miasma, and, who cares whether I agree with him or not? It's a matter of supreme indifference.
If only 10% of what that guy said was true. Yeah.
Yeah, I mean, but it's got nothing to do with, but the desire to know whether things are true or false is a very different thing. The bottom line is the guy had a huge amount of knowledge of and understanding of real stuff that goes on in the real world, and therefore I admire him.
There's so much of material from Terence McKenna on YouTube that you can explore as well, and I must admit, I thoroughly enjoy listening to his material.
Yeah, and interestingly, I can't remember the name of the song, but there was a band called the Shaman, and he did a voiceover on one of the songs on their album Boss Drum, which is a brilliant album. I love that album, and I really love that particular song. I just can't remember the name of the song. It had some funny kind of name, it's really great. It's really great. And so just from the point of view of the music, quite apart from anything else, I recommend that album if anybody hasn't come across it. Boss Drum by the Shaman. Really great album. Really great album. Does that mean I agree with the lyrics? you know that I don't. Do I care that I agree with them when I enjoy that album? No, I don't.
Okay. Yeah. Jeff asks, Similar with the trigrams, can you give the names of the 8 trigrams and their spelling? Are these correct? And then he lays them out. But I think it'd just be much easier to just say what they are and spell them out. I think he's making notes. So
I'm giving you the names that I use.
Yeah.
Because they're the only ones I'm interested in. And as we've said before, these are the names that we came up with. It wasn't just me. Some other people who were involved in this. So the way I understand it is with a particular acronym, which I think we might have mentioned, which is SCRE, yeah, SCRE. Yep. Structure, change, which is the one that's a dodgy name. I probably wish it was a different name. Yeah. Squall, and then return, and then extremes. Yeah. So they're pairs, and these pairings are all the different trigrams have relationships between each other, and they have the strongest of all those relationships is the mutually supportive relationship. That's where in a particular action, 2 trigrams naturally have a mutually supportive relationship between each other. So so just as a catalogue, all the solid lines, that is what I call jag. So that's yang, yang, yang. Remember, I'm counting up from the baseline. So the first yang is the baseline, yang, midline, yang, top line, yang. I call that jag, J-A-G. In the 2-in-1, so that's ahari in Chinese, or futatsu hitotsu in Japanese. The 2-in-1 of that is all of those lines reversed, so all the yangs become yin. So that'd be a yin baseline, a yin midline, and a yin top line, and that I call meld, M-E-L-D. The next pairing are, the first one is a broken baseline, a yin baseline, a yang midline, and a yin top line, and I call that torrent. That's T-O-R-R-E-N-T. Remember, these are my own words, yeah, or our own words. The other one, the other name, is kindle. So that's a yang baseline, a yin midline, and a yang top line. That's K-I-N-D-L-E, kindle. The next pairing starts with a yin baseline, a yang midline, and a yang top line, and I call that squall. That's S-Q-U-A-L-L. And the 2-in-1, the mutually supportive one, has a yang baseline, a yin midline, and a yin top line, and I call that Gaia. That's G-Y-R-E. The next pairing are, the first one has a yin baseline, a yin midline, and a yang top line, and I call that Shard, S-H-A-R-D. And its 2-in-1 partner, its mutually supportive partner, is a yang baseline, a yang midline, and a yin top line, and that would be Mere, M-E-R-E. And those are the names that I like to use. Now, I could give you Mongol for them, but doing so, just like giving you the Chinese for them, would be much more misleading. I created those words, I'm not going to tell you which one's which, but I'd start telling you, I think I mentioned them before, words like Tatolan, Asach, Shurug, Ergeldech, Tarak, Tingis, Negdech, and Tolka. I think I've mentioned those before. But those things are not names of the trigrams. Those are descriptions of the changes. Yeah. And so I deliberately came up with these words to try and come up with words that give some tiny sense of what's involved in the change without making you think that it's a thing.
Yeah.
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 And the Chinese ones are even worse for that than the Mongol ones. And so I'm going to stick with my pseudo-English ones, if that's all right.
Brilliant. I mean, the second half to the question, which I think, Jeff, will be answered in future episodes for sure. And he's asking, are they just words used in brackets instead of the Chinese traditional terms, or do they mean something more? And, that's going to be...
They mean something less.
Something less.
They are used in place of the Chinese traditional terms because they mean something less, not because they mean something more.
Perfect.
Yeah.
Okay, I think we have 2 more questions. Okay, so this is sort of bringing us back to the beginning. This is from David. Okay, when developing chelicity, does it change if you are someone with a disability, blind, deaf, para, or quadriplegic? I wonder if I think of this at a baseline level, since I am blind now. I also wonder if the way I view the world has begun to develop my understanding of how we need to be more in tune with nature.
So sensory deprivation, or the removal of one or more of the senses, is another one of these things that is not so much of a disadvantage in terms of shamanistic technique as it may appear at first sight. The sensory deprivation is a technique that many different types of sensory deprivation is a technique that shamans have used to give a different way of looking at the world. So inevitably, if you have some form of missing sense or reduced sense, then inevitably the way that the human body works, the way that the central nervous system works, the way that the human beings, the causal team naturally works within human beings is you're going to have advantages, in some cases serious advantages, in terms of learning and coming to an understanding of shamanistic technique because of that. And I think this is quite famous in shamanistic societies. Things that are seen as bad or disadvantage or problematic in non-shamanistic societies are definitely not seen in that way within shamanistic communities. In many cases, just the opposite. In some shamanistic communities, not all, but again, one of the traditions, if there isn't something, what we would call, what we in the West would ignorantly call something wrong with you, then you probably wouldn't stand a chance of becoming a shaman's apprentice. The shaman would probably pass you by and choose somebody else. Because shamanism is all about perceiving the world in different ways. And if you are kind of forced to do that through circumstance or you don't really have a choice over it, the fact remains that you are seeing the world or understanding or perceiving the world in a different way from the people around you in your society. And that is a major advantage that you have over those people. So it's, once again, as with things that we would call psychoses, that's a great starting point. For being a shaman, just a really, really great starting point for being a shaman, or becoming a shaman. Obviously the range of technique that you can apply, and people shouldn't really mistake the range of technique that a shaman's able to apply with their ability within any given technique. In the past there have probably been amazing shamans who've only really gone deep on one technique. Those people have existed in the past, and their people would have probably described those people nevertheless as great shamans. They can do amazing things with their one technique. Whereas you may find rather more shamans who've done a whole, shall we say, a menagerie of different techniques in a shallow amount of depth. And nobody in a million years would describe them as great shamans, So I think that, it obviously there will be some superficial limitations through blindness or deafness or maybe some sort of, the ability to not to feel touch through your skin or, whatever that might be, or, immobility in the limbs, immobility in the body, even complete immobility of any kind. It's superficial from the point of view of shamanism. It's superficial stuff because all of those things are opportunities for the creation of technique that can be applied by that shaman. And within that technique, the fact that they've in many cases, had to come up with a technique themselves means they'll be better at it than anybody else as well. And within that technique, there is no limit to the depth that person can go to. Do you follow what I'm saying? So it's a question of breadth versus depth. And in shamanism, depth always trumps breadth.
Perfect. A follow-up question is, in episode 7, you say to focus on relaxing vision. Does this also hold true for the other senses, such as hearing, touch, smell, and taste, when beginning with pat?
Yes, it does.
Yeah.
Yeah, the simple answer, yes. So. Absolutely, it does, yeah.
Yeah. Okay, last question is from me, Damon. This is from your student, Joe.
My friend, Joe.
I thought I'd put you on the spot a bit. So, okay, so we talk about catalysts, yeah? We talk about catalysts and shamanic technique. And, I'm coming from a place where now I completely get that shamanism and catalysts don't go hand in hand until you're well more advanced. So putting that aside, are there any benefits outside of specifically learning shamanism to trying these out regarding what people talk about, like revelations about nature and connections to nature and the various studies that are being done now, which are about depression and overcoming depression? and the very clear but very difficult to put into words knowledge that you come away from those experiences with.
So any experience can be beneficial. And let me answer this in a different way. We have a mutual friend, who's what you would call a traditional Chinese doctor. And love the guy. You can probably guess who I'm talking about. And he had this conversation with him a few times. He's kind of a bit, I don't say a bit, he's an easygoing guy, but he's a bit unhappy that when a traditional Chinese remedy has been investigated and found to be effective, it becomes classed as medicine, and they're no longer allowed to prescribe it. If it's never proven to be effective, they can prescribe it as much as they want.
Yeah.
Do you understand what I'm getting at? And, obviously, there is no difference between... one day, the person that I mentioned from South America, who I spent a wonderful, beautiful year practicing with and studying with, they blew up at me one day because I foolishly described coca leaves as drugs, thus disrespecting their culture.
Yeah.
Completely unintentionally, and I don't think I was thinking very straight. I certainly wasn't on the subject at the time. I made that really foolhardy mistake. And it's all about perceptions, isn't it? All things in the world, all plants, all animals, all minerals. If you want to think about the animal, mineral, vegetable, that we put the world into little boxes, all of those things, they have wonderful things to contribute to us. And I don't think there's any exceptions to that. It's just the way in which they contribute wonderfully may vary from thing to thing. And I prefer to see it in that way. Life is a rich experience. If you put me on the spot and you were to say, could you treat the use of psychoactive substances as a type of torsional teen? Well, sure you could. But it's my caution is really based on the kind of person who's asked me that question so many times in the past. And 9 times out of 10, it's somebody who doesn't have a thimble full of bat when they ask me it. And that's what worries me, because the thing that turns the torsional teen of the torsional teen of the use of catalysts, and psychoactive substances are not the only catalysts in the world. Hey, if you want one that's legal, alcohol is a type of catalyst, and also so is a fan. Some of the more advanced people on the podcast will know what I'm talking about.
Cocoa as well.
Yeah. And a flute. So the point I'm trying to make is that my experience of the people who are really keen on asking me this question over and over again over the many years that I've been doing this stuff is that it tends to be that the people who are so keen on asking me this question tend to be more lacking in the very thing that they need in order to do that properly than the general population. Does that?
No,
that is bat.
Yeah.
That is bat. Yeah.
Yeah.
So if you're going to do that, I'm not going to be able to stop you. If it's in the early stages of your shamanism, so what I would do instead is the exact opposite of the advice I gave to on the other question, which is focus on your torsional teen. I would go hell for leather on your bat before you do anything like that.
Yeah. Good stuff. Wise advice from my friend Damon.
I'm honoured, sir.
Fantastic. So I think that's been a really good episode. I think there's some really good questions there. Hopefully that's helped a lot of you. Well, helped all of you out, let alone the people who asked the questions. So if you do have any more questions, do send them into wovenenergy.com. We are still, so that's joe@wovenenergy.com. We are still doing these podcasts. We are still here. It's not like we've completely disappeared. We will just do them as and when we can, and we will keep this going indefinitely. So it might be a week, it might be months, but we're still here and we're still going. So let's see what happens in the next episode. I'm not quite sure what we're going to do yet, so we'll have a chat, Dame, and we'll work it out. But thank you very much for listening. Hope you've enjoyed it, and we'll see you in the next episode.
Thanks, mate.